This is Stacy Hilt from the Casket Lottery, and you're listening to my chapter of As the Story Grows.
Welcome to the next chapter of As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. This week, I'm excited to share my chat with the Casket Lottery and former Coalesce bassist, Stacy Hilt. The Casket Lottery will release their new record, Short Songs for End Times, this Friday, November 6th. Stacy chats about the chaotic early days of Coalesce, the Casket Lottery's origin, and how much damage COVID has done to the music industry. Even as an established band, releasing new music and not being able to tour has put a strain on the Casket Lottery, as it has a lot of bands who survive on touring. So I encourage you to pick up the new record. It's excellent. Enjoy this week's chat with Stacy Hilt from the Casket Lottery. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing fine, man. Just not expecting this cold weather in Kansas City to hit so quick.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was like 80 degrees last week, and then it was like 40 degrees yesterday morning, and it was about 40 degrees this morning, and it's supposed to be 85 again by Thursday. So it's kind of this weird, sporadic Kansas City weather we get all the time.
Yeah, it's supposed to be near 80, I think, on Thursday. It was like a high of 59 the other day, so it's buck crazy all over the country.
Yeah. There's no such thing as climate change, right?
Yeah. Everything is normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you grow up in the Kansas City area?
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas City my entire life. It wasn't until I actually toured with Coalesce that I actually left Kansas City. So that was like a fish out of water, if there ever was that story. Just leaving Kansas City with Coalesce when I was 18 years old and telling my parents, hey, I'm touring the country for 3 months. And that was pretty much it. That's how I got out of Kansas City.
That's awesome. What was growing up like?
Very Midwestern. I came from a semi-middle class family. You know, my grandfather was a Native American, and he had grown up on a reservation and then moved to Kansas City to make a better life for his now growing family. He lived in Duncan, Arizona. And then I was raised in basically a suburb of Overland Park, Kansas. And then we moved a lot. My parents had a tendency to move pretty much every year. So it was like every time I got kind of settled into a school, I was moving on to the next school, and the rules for each school got weirder and weirder as I got older, it seemed. There was one school I went to in like second or third grade where they still had like headmasters at the school, and you would get pulled into the office if you did something that they construed as bad, and you would get lashings. And this was like in second and third grade. So yeah. Some weird things growing up, but yeah, mostly it was just a kind of middle class upbringing.
That's cool. What got you into music?
My dad was a guitar player when he was in his teens, and I had always had just kind of a natural love for music. When I was 4 years old, they bought me my first record player because I was like a huge Kiss fan. Because, I mean, who wasn't at the time, because of all the makeup and the kind of comic book hero kind of personas that they had. I was super into Kiss. I had Kiss Viewmasters, Kiss record players. My first record that I ever bought was Kiss Destroyer. And it was at a record store that no longer exists here in Kansas City called Peaches. And, that was my first record. And then I think my second record was, Maneater by Daryl Hall and John Oates. So that was the range. So I originally wanted to play drums, and I tried for several years, from about the age of 10 to the age of 15, to convince my parents to buy me a set of drums, and they told me it was way too loud an instrument. And then the day I told my dad I wanted to play guitar, I literally left to have lunch with my older brother, and by the time I got back, I had a guitar sitting in my bedroom. Like, that's how amped he was with the fact that I wanted to play a guitar and not drums, that he just went right out that day and bought me a guitar. And it's like, here you go, let's start lessons. So that's how it lasted, and lessons only lasted about 2 lessons before I was just like, I just want to play Alice in Chains songs, and I just want to play Pantera songs, and so yeah, that's how I started.
That's awesome. What was your introduction into hardcore?
I was actually like a big metal kid, and it was Jess Steiniger from Coalesce that actually got me introduced to hardcore. Jess and I went to the same high school together, and I was playing in a band called March. It was kind of just a grungy punk band that I sang and played bass in, and then he was doing a small Hare Krishna, a Krishna core band called Amara. And I remember playing a talent show, and after the talent show, Jess was just like, hey, you want to come play bass in this band? Because I was originally a guitar player, and that's how Jess and I met, because I was wanting him to teach me Metallica songs. So we initially met that way, and he just came up to me and said, hey, dude, you want to play in this band with me? And I was like, cool, I've got bass equipment, let's do it. And then Amara eventually became Breach, and then Breach eventually became Coalesce.
That's awesome. So you were in Amara, like, you had no affiliation with Hare Krishna. You were just in the band.
I was a Hare Krishna too. I converted.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I converted to a Hare Krishna as well for about 3.5 years. Like 92-ish to like 96 or 97. I was a Hare Krishna.
Was that like a big scene or thing happening in Kansas City at the time, or?
It was growing a little bit, because the Krishna temple was just in St. Louis, so a lot of the Midwestern kids that were into the hardcore scene were either kind of on the militant hardcore kind of Earth Crisis side of music, or they were on the kind of Krishna core side of music. And it was easy access, because, I mean, St. Louis is only about 3 hours away from Kansas City. So there was times that we would just hop in our car and drive to the temple in St. Louis and have lunch, and then hang out in the temple there, and then drive back to Kansas City. It wasn't as big as in some cities, but there was definitely a small movement of Krishna people here. I mean, a lot of my friends were Krishna, and that's how I met a lot of the kind of outside group of my friends was through Krishna.
That's cool. Yeah. And then like Ingram, he was part of like the vegan straight edge side of the scene, right?
Yeah, he was part of the vegan straight edge. I remember playing my first Amara show. We played in Sean's basement in Lee Summit, Missouri. And we played the show, and I remember we all went to Taco Bell afterwards. And this is kind of embarrassing and funny at the same time. We went to Taco Bell afterwards, and he was, staunch vegan, and he went and ordered his tostada with only refried beans, no cheese or anything like that. And then it got served with cheese, and he was about to firestorm the Taco Bell because he was so angry that they put cheese on his tostada when he didn't ask for it. It was ridiculous to see all these like little shaved head kids walk in there angry that cheese was put on their Mexican food. So yeah, that was kind of my introduction to Sean. I was just like, oh my God, this guy's intense. So
that's hilarious. What's that transition from Amara? You said it just kind of evolved over time into Coalesce.
Eventually, when Sean joined the band, and then when Jim Red joined the band, they were just like, well, we're not in the Krishna conscious thing, so we need to go a different direction. And we wanted to work with both of them, because they were both amazing musicians and vocalists and everything like that. So we were like, okay, and we did our normal thing, where we just pick up a dictionary, flip through the page, stick your finger on the first word that you hit your finger on. That would be the name of the band, and that was Breach. There was no method behind why we picked our songs. We just flipped the dictionary, slammed our finger on the first word, and that was going to be the name. That's how Coalesce came about too. But it kind of fit at the time when we made the transition to Coalesce.
Coalesce was like such a different chaotic sound from a lot of what was happening in hardcore. What was the influence behind that kind of sound and the chaotic nature?
Well, I think a lot of it came from Jess and I really loving bands like Metallica and Pantera, where we kind of took that and morphed it into what we thought it sounded like. Because I've never actually had a lesson. I don't know theory. I don't know any of that stuff, but Jess does. He was in jazz band and he has the background of theory. And in his head, that's always what he thought we sounded like. He thought we sounded like a Midwestern version of Pantera and Metallica, which in reality, we sounded like neither of those bands. But his kind of jazz influence and metal influence kind of morphed into what became Coalesce, because all the off-time signatures and stuff like that were deeply rooted in his jazz background. And we were, I guess you would say, more punk than we were metal, but more metal than we were punk. And we actually, that's a phrase I heard uttered several times on our first tour, where we would play these venues and kids would come up to us and they're like, "What the hell are you playing here for, man? You're way too metal to be playing this place." And then a day later, a kid would be like, "What are you playing here for, man? You're way too punk to be playing this metal place." So we'd never really had a place in the music scene, because like we were too punk to be metal and too metal to be punk. So that's kind of where we were, and the fit. And there wasn't a whole lot around that sounded like what Jess was doing, because he and Sean were definitely the masterminds behind Coalesce. I was just someone that was able to keep up.
Yeah, you guys kind of had a rocky start, breaking up and getting back together. Was it tough to just like was it just like internal division that was tough to keep going, or?
Well, we did our first tour in 95, and Jess had just been diligent about just basically, he hounded the guys at Earache Records. Like, Jess and I would watch Headbangers Ball, and at the end of every video that we really, really love, like Napalm Death, stuff like that, we would see Earache Records at the bottom of there. And every time Jess and I would be sitting there, we'd like elbow each other. It's like, we're going to be on Earache Records. So we need to get on Earache Records. So it was Jess's mission to get us on Earache Records. So he spent all of my entire 11th grade and part of my senior year just hounding all the reps at Earache, saying, "You need to sign my band. You really want to put a record out on my band. We're going to be big. You need to." And he just like hounded them. So finally, our friend Lou and a few of our buddies up there finally said, "You know what? Let's give these guys a chance." And they started a kind of offshoot of Earache. I think it was called Chapter. The New Chapter or something like that. I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically
New Chapter.
Yeah, and they would basically release more indie sounding, noise sounding bands and stuff like that. And then we did 002 on there, and we were super stoked. Our first show we did together was at the Limelight in New York City, so we drove all the way from Kansas City to play a show at the Limelight, which was like this historical venue where all these big bands in New York would go through, and it was basically a converted Gothic cathedral. And we get there and it's like, what are we doing here? I mean, we were playing the show to like 10 kids, if we were lucky, about a month ago, and now we're sitting on the stage playing with the Lords of Brooklyn and the Troubleneck Brothers, who were two hip-hop groups from New York, and for some reason, Earache somehow got us shoehorned onto this venue and onto this bill. We're like, we don't fit here. What are we doing? So we got to New York City, and Jess and Sean and I, we were like, we're going to be so big. We're so stoked. We're finally on Earache. And we get to Central Park, and they're taking us on a tour of Central Park. And our drummer says, "Oh, well, when I get home, I'm leaving the band." And he had never mentioned this to any of us before the second we're sitting with the record label representatives, and says, "Yeah, when I get home, I'm going to college and I'm leaving the band." And we're like, "Well, when were you going to tell us this? Why did you wait till the first show on our tour to tell us you were going to leave?" So that's how that first tour started. It was already this tension, because we were like, well, we've spent these year and a half, 2 years writing these songs and getting on Earache, and then you're just going to bail? And that's where the tension started. And then when we got back from the tour, we just we split. There was a lot of division in the band. If Jim was going to stay, he didn't want Sean to stay. And if, just a bunch of stuff happened, and we ended up splitting in 95. And then we got back together 96, I think it was. We went to Jess's wedding, and he asked if we wanted to do Coalesce again, and Jim didn't, but Sean and I did. Excuse me. So we ended up having lunch with Jess, and then we planned on getting together, and we tried out several drummers, and then he came to Kansas City, and we met James DeWeese through me, and then the rest is history.
That's cool. What led to your leaving the band?
I think I started feeling more and more like I wasn't being satisfied creatively, because Coalesce I loved playing with, but Coalesce was never my band. It was always Jess and Sean's band. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they never treated me like I was unwelcome in the band. It was just one of those things that creatively I didn't feel like I was being fulfilled. And Nathan Ellis and I had been talking on several trips that he had been with us about doing something more in the vein of Giant's Chair or Boy's Life, kind of the KC sound. And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I wanted to do that, and the less and less I wanted to do Coalesce. So we kind of got a reputation for kind of being rough on stage and having like crazy things happen. And we played Wilkes-Barre Fest, which was the second to last date of our East Coast tour for Give Them Rope. And before the set was even over, things just basically became chaos. And I literally packed my equipment up and just walked, exit left, just walked out, put my equipment by the van, and then just left. That was my last show.
Wow. That's crazy. Were you in the band around the time when they almost signed to Solid State, or was that after you?
That was Nathan Ellis.
Okay.
Yeah, it was always Very Distro. Was Earache Records and Very Distro were the only two that I was involved with signing to. Because I left the summer of '97, and by the fall of '97, Nathan had joined the band and taken my place.
So you knew Nathan before leaving?
Oh yeah. He was our little brother. We would just he would always drop Dan Askew, the guy that started Second Nature Recordings. He would always kind of be Dan's chauffeur, and he would just show up to the house when we were getting ready to leave on a trip and say, "Well, here's Dan. I'll see you guys when you get back." And then eventually we just said, "Why don't you just hop in with us?" And he's like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." So no planning whatsoever. We just kidnapped this kid, and we would drag him all over the country with us. And I was like, "You want to tell your parents?" He's like, No, I'll call them when we get there. Because, I mean, they can't tell him no if he's already there. So he would just hop in the van with us, and next thing you know, he'd call his mom, and she would say, "Oh, okay, cool, where are you at?" Thinking he was in, Idaho or somewhere in the United States. Like, "Well, I'm in Canada." And had to explain that he was, 14 and a half hours north of us in Canada, thinking that, and he didn't have a coat because he wasn't ready to go with us. But he didn't pack a bag. He didn't have a coat. He wasn't, ready for cold weather. So we just drag him with us everywhere we went. And eventually he just became a fixture.
What was it like starting a band with the person who replaced you in Coalesce? Was it just natural, or because you were doing both? I mean, he was doing both at the same time, right?
Yeah, no, it was pretty natural because, Nathan and I were really good friends. I mean, he was always my co-pilot because after every show, no one would want to drive at night. So Nathan would always volunteer to be the disc jockey and just flip through our CD case, and change the music for me. And then we would just talk all night about our dreams to play in the band. And we always said, well, when we get back, we need to do this together. So, it was never weird or anything like that. So when I left, before I even found out that Nathan had been approached by Jess, I asked Sean, I was like, "Have you talked to Nathan?" And he's like, "Yeah, we talked to Nathan." I was like, "Well, that was going to be my suggestion because he's a perfect fit. He's a great musician. He loves what you guys do. And I thought it would be cool if he did it." So no, there was never any hard feelings or any weirdness. So I think it was like late '97, early '98, Coalesce was kind of waning a little bit. And I put together a benefit show in Kansas City, Missouri to try to save a venue we had here called the Fuse Box. And Coalesce and Season to Risk and a bunch of local bands played to try to raise enough money to keep this venue open. And after the show, Nathan came up to me and was like, "So what are you doing right now?" And at the time I was playing in a punk rock band called the Sunshine Vandals. And I said, "Well, I'm playing in this punk band. What's going on?" He's like, "Well," he gave me a cassette of early Casket recordings and said, "This is the one I'm working on. Would you be interested in doing this with me? Just listen to those and let me know." So he handed me the cassette, and I listened to him, and I called him up the next day, and it's like, I'm in. Let's do it. So that's how it started.
How'd you guys end up recruiting a 15-year-old to be your drummer in Nathan?
Nathan was skating at the time, and he met up with a bunch of his buddies at a local skate spot. And Nathan Richardson just kind of happened to be there with some friends saying, hey, we're going to go watch our friends skate. You want to come? And so Nathan Richardson came, and Nathan and Nathan Jr., what's what we called him eventually, because Ellis became known as senior and Richardson became known as junior in the band, so we wouldn't confuse the Nathans. So he ended up going to some little skate park or skate area, and Nathan Richardson was there, and he was like, yeah, I play drums. And Nathan's like, oh, you do? Well, we're starting a band. You want to come play? And he's like, yeah. So just kind of this casual, why don't you come play with us? It wasn't a tryout or anything. It was just like, I heard you're really good. Cool, let's start a band. And then we kind of got together, and then Nathan called me up the next day and said, hey, we got a drummer. So we drove to Lake Winnebago just outside Lee Summit and played in Nathan Jr.'s basement. And that's how it started. Yeah, Second Nature was where we started releasing LPs. We did Dot on Status Records with a guy named Seth Brown from Thousand Oaks, California. We'd done a few little splits with a label out of Florida, and then it was Halloween, late '98 Halloween, and Seth Brown had came down from California to hang out, and his intention was to offer to put out an LP. And we kind of went out to dinner with him that night, and Nathan and I were kind of just becoming a little disillusioned with the whole thing, because I'd been playing for 5 years and touring at that point, and nothing seemed to be clicking as far as label interest or releases happening and stuff like that. So Nathan and I were just like, well, this is it, man. We're putting it all on the table right now. And we had actually talked about that Halloween in '98 possibly being our last show. And as soon as we finished our set, like Nathan and I probably played harder than we had at any point in our musical endeavors at that point. And then Dan came up to Nathan and I and was like, all right, you guys win. I'll put up a new record. And we're like, really? And he's like, yeah, we'll do the record. And then Seth came up and he was like, oh, bummer, man. I was here to totally do the same thing. I was going to offer to put out a record. So it's like he was just 2 minutes too late to make the offer, and then Dan offered to put the record out. And then we pretty much worked with Dan from that point on. We had still been kind of semi-obligated to do some smaller releases with a few other labels. And we tried to record them at a couple local studios, one of which was called Trainwreck Studio. And we were in there for maybe 2 days working on what would have been Dot and maybe some of the early stuff. And then 2 days later, there's this massive flood and wiped the whole studio out, lost all the recordings.
Oh, man.
But we had like rough mixes of them. And by the time Dan heard them, he was just like, no. You're going to go to Red House, which is Black Lodge, which was where Ed Rose recorded. And he's like, I'm not going to have you put out something that sounds like that. You're going to go to a good studio. So he kicked in some extra money to pay the difference to get us to record Dot and a lot of our early stuff, because he didn't want it to be recorded at a bad studio. So he kicked in the extra money so we could go to work with Ed. And that's kind of how the early recordings happened.
That's awesome. What led to you guys going on hiatus, to calling it quits in 2006?
Nathan Ellis had he was a father at the time, and he had a very young kid at the time, and it was really hard for us to commit to any kind of lengthy tours or anything like that, any kind of normal schedule. And for me, I became kind of tired and burnt out on the whole thing. And I just gotten married at the time, so I was just like, I want to put down roots. I want to settle for a little bit. And it was partially my decision and just partially naturally happened. We never split. Like, we never got together and said, I guess that's it. We're not going to do this anymore. Just kind of like one day we got home from tour and I loaded my equipment in my car and drove home. And then 2 years later, we're still not playing together. It was just that's how it happened.
How'd you guys get connected with No Sleep Records?
I don't remember how that happened. I remember we did a short run in 2009 or 10 where we went to Michigan and Chicago and stuff like that, and played with the Small Brown Bike guys, and just did a short stint with them in the Midwest. And we had been contacted by Chris Hansen shortly before that, and that was like, he was kind of a new up and coming band, and he was really supporting a lot of up and coming groups like Touche Amore, and I think Title Fight may have been on his label as well, and he was kind of nurturing these up and coming bands. And then I think he kind of approached us when we were talks to do Real Fear, because we were a 5-piece at the time, and we had already started writing the early parts of what would eventually become Real Fear. I think we had In the Branches and a few of those songs that we were playing out live. And that's how I think we just got in contact with Chris, and he offered us a deal.
How'd the re-releases of the first 3 LPs come about with Run for Cover?
Well, Run for Cover, the guys that had started Run for Cover had contacted Nathan and asked if we would be interested in them doing the release for us. And they basically told Nathan, we're the reason we started a label is because we collected your records and you guys influenced us. And, Nathan was always the mastermind behind our artwork. He and Dan Askew would kind of put the artwork together and everything like that. And that inspired the guys from Run for Cover because of the quality that was coming out of that, inspired them to do a label. So they were just like, we want to pay it forward. You kind of influenced us and we want to help you guys out. Would you be interested in doing this release? And Nathan was kind of like, well, yeah, we'll do the release, but I think we should tour on it. And they were like, that's a great idea. You guys want to tour on it? So we were like, yeah, we'll just tour. We'll put together, an East and West Coast tour, and we'll support the vinyl release. Since we never really got to go out and support Moving Mountains or Survivals for Cowards or Real Fear in any kind of meaningful way, it was a good opportunity for us to finally go out and play a selection of songs for all those records for people that may have never seen us the first time through, or that we'd never had the opportunity to play in front of people. So that's kind of how that all came about, is we really wanted to be able to play those songs for people again, and then Run for Cover gave us the opportunity.
That's awesome. Yeah, I saw you guys here in Philly, and it was phenomenal. It was great because, I never got to see you live. And
yeah, that was one of my favorite shows of that whole tour. It was so cool.
Yeah, Johnny Brenda's, right? Was that show Johnny Brenda's? Yeah.
I'm worried that, by the time things kind of normalize again, that a lot of these great little venues that, would house a band of our size aren't going to be in existence anymore by the time we do this again. I mean, we're seeing so many. I mean, even bigger, like well-known venues like the Troubadour are talking about not opening their doors again. And those venues have been around for, decades. Elton John played those places, I played CBGBs and I'm sitting on stage and all I can think is Sting from the Police played here. Bad Brains played this stage. All these huge bands that influenced me growing up got their start on this stage. And here we are. And now that place is gone. It's just, a tourist attraction in Las Vegas in a hotel somewhere now, where it used to be this mecca of all these great bands that would come through New York, and now it's just a t-shirt venue now.
Yeah. COVID really wreaked havoc on the music industry and venues, and it sucks. Seeing people like lose careers and jobs, and yeah, it's the worst.
I mean, when we kind of heard the rumblings of, COVID and the coronavirus and stuff like that as we were, in Florida playing Fest last year around this time, we kind of heard the rumblings of it, and, we kept hearing that there was going to be nothing to worry about. It was just going to be a new strain of the flu and all this stuff. And then we were wrapping up writing what would be short songs for End Times. And we went into the studio and we were like, had these grand visions, we're going to tour harder than we ever have in our lives and all this stuff. And then as soon as the record's done, we're just like, oh, great. What do we do now? There's nowhere to play. We can't leave our hometown now. So yeah, it's been an odd year for sure.
Short songs for End Times, your first album since 2012. What has inspired you guys to keep going? And did those tours for the vinyl reissues, was that the inspiration to write a new record?
Oh, for sure. With Nathan and I, we didn't want the Casket Lottery to be considered a nostalgia band. I mean, I know there's going to be some nostalgia around our releases, and people are going to love the old releases, but for Nathan and I, we've always had in mind that we're always going to keep moving forward. We don't want to be the band that shows up and plays only our old songs. We wanted to offer something new. So the rumblings of what would become Short Songs started towards the end of our solo tour of the East and West Coast. And Nathan, as soon as he got home from that, he's like, don't worry about it. I'll start writing stuff as soon as I get home. And then before I knew it, I started getting rough kitchen demos of new guitar tracks, almost immediately as we got home. And then a couple of weeks after we got home, I think the Get Up Kids offer came through. And we were like, well, yeah, man. So we took a month or two off and then went back out with the Get Up Kids on the West Coast. And, we were super stoked to be out with them because, that was kind of 20 years in the making. We'd all been friends and we'd played in similar circles and we'd done a couple local shows together. And then eventually, they offered to do the tour with us and we went out and it was great. It was a really great tour for us and that inspired us even more. And that's where we met our new guitar players, our second guitar player, Terrence Vitale, is that he had been running sound for us on our solo tour and he was running sound for us and the Get Up Kids on the Get Up Kids tour. And we just kind of hit it off as friends, and he just happened to be a great musician. So when we got back, he kind of started to slowly slot his way in there, and before you know it, he really connected with us as writing partners. And then next thing you know, we're a good portion through the record.
You were able to play live. You did a show with the Get Up Kids. What was that like?
It was weird.
Yeah.
I've kind of been seeing stuff on social media. It's a little venue outside, and it's literally on this old 1960s, basically flatbed truck. They set up a stage on this thing, and they kind of extended out a couple feet one way and out the back a little bit, but you're essentially playing on this really long bed of an old truck. And it's basically backed right up against this brick wall in between several of these little restaurants in a place that we call the West Bottoms here in Kansas City. It's right next to the old Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. So they set it up down there, and it's just this odd little thing. They've got AstroTurf down in strips across this parking lot, and then they have these picnic tables at an angle every 10 feet apart, and then they basically social distance do these little picnic table shows. And it's set up by some of the people that run another local venue called the Record Bar. So it was a benefit show so that all the money could go to the Record Bar guys and try to kind of figure out where their November rent was coming from, because there's obviously going to be no November shows coming through that venue. So we need to figure out a way to keep the lights on there during this whole thing.
That's wild. It's cool that people are finding ways to make it work a little bit. even though things are really crazy. How'd you guys end up with Wiretap Records for this release?
A friend of mine, Rob Frost, you talked to him. I basically leaked a couple of the songs to him. I'm going to get in trouble for this. I sent him a couple of the tracks. I sent him a couple of tracks to what would eventually be the single, which is More Blood and Born Lonely. And I kind of sent him those tracks because he was like, I really want to hear this, because I've been on Midwest emo postings and stuff like that and been talking about progress on the record, and I would send pictures of our studio time. And eventually he just set me up on Messenger, like, this needs to get out, because I mean we were kind of struggling trying to figure out, you know, how this is going to release, and Dan Askew isn't doing Second Nature as a full-time thing like he used to anymore, and a lot of the labels that, you know, we had contacted were just like, I would love to, but, you know, we're trying to nurture a younger group of people, you know, we want to bring up these younger bands. Mm-hmm. So basically we're just like, you're too old. We don't want a bunch of old guys on our label. We're trying to get these young bands, which I totally understand. You know, we've missed our window of our 20-something years, you know. So, and eventually, you know, Rob was just like, well, I'm going to put you in contact with my friend Rob, and he runs Wiretap. And I was just like, really? Okay, cool. So I got his email. I gave all his information to Nathan and Jason, you know, and the guys in the band, and then eventually the talks started up, and before we know it, you know, Big Scary Monsters is involved, and then Dan Askew is just like, yeah, well, we'll put it out on the Second Nature imprint too. So he kind of stepped into the fray a little bit, and before we know it, it's Wiretap, Big Scary Monsters, and Second Nature doing this kind of collaborative release.
That's cool. Do you feel like, you know, I hate to use the term legacy band, but as an older band that's put out releases, it's easier to put out new music in 2020 without having to tour on it? Or is it just as, like, scary a proposition, I guess?
It's just a scarier proposition.
Yeah.
Like, we've got label backing for sure, but, you know, Nathan and Jason have both basically, they put a lot of money into the recording. You know, initially before we had the label support, basically the entire record and most of our merch is setting on their credit cards. So we had to they had to spend a ton of money to kind of make this happen. You know, they believed in it so strongly and the song so strongly that they were willing to take that risk. So, you know, but they took the risk at a time when we thought, well, cool, we'll be on tour all summer and we'll make that money back in a couple of months. You know, and then as the year kind of wore on and then it became 2020, that was like, well, that tour, okay, it got pushed back. You know, we'll do that tour not March, we'll do it in June now. And it's, oh, well, not June, now we'll do it in July. Not July, not August. And the months just kept getting further and further back. And then it's just like, all right, we'll be out August 2021, so we'll make the money back then. And it just became that kind of obstacle, like this hurdle that we had to get over. So, yeah, I mean, it's a way scarier proposition, I think, more so for Nathan and Jason, because they have so much financially, you know, to make this record happen, that they definitely have a lot more writing on it. So having a label to help release it and several distros to help us release it, you know, in Europe and in America and stuff like that, you know, that definitely eased the tension for them. But there's definitely some tension there. I mean, even at almost 45 in my case, as much as I wouldn't want to leave my family, it's so much of who I am that I would rather be out there in the summer doing what it is that I love and supporting this record in a natural way for us, you know. With the new way, the new normal, we're having to devise new ways of doing things. You know, we've talked about streaming, and, you know, we've got some local venues that want to have live bands play, stream over the internet, and they've found out a way that they can actually monetize that through streaming, and they want to try to do something to that effect. But I mean, it's a different situation to where, you know, we're elbow to elbow in some small venues and stuff like that. And then now we're just playing to a camera and having people watch it, you know, and have a little feed happening where they're like saying, this is great, this is awesome. And it just makes things a little weird.
Yeah. Yeah. And merch sales and potentially new fans and various things. It's much tougher to come by.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you know, I've noticed there's a pretty big uptake in a lot of younger people that didn't catch us the first time around. discovering us now, and then I see a lot of people saying, well, I never knew this happened, how come I've never heard of these guys before, and then they go back our back catalog and they're like, you've been here since the 90s? And it's just this weird thing, like, yeah, I mean, I was here since the early 90s, I was on tour at 95 at the age of 18, So yeah, I've been at this for a long time. We wrote this record from the first note because, when we did Real Fear, we wrote it as a 5-piece, and it was one of those things that when we did the reunion stuff, we did just the Casket Lottery tour, we were able to take out a 5-piece, but we discovered more and more to get 5 dudes in the same room on the same schedule to do shows like that was, becoming more and more an impossibility. So when we started this record, we just stripped everything away and just wanted to make a loud guitar record. And the sole intention of the record was for us to play for people live. So every song was crafted to be a live performance. And, it wasn't arbitrary or anything like that, though. We had moments where we would get excited, like, I could see this being like a shout vocal part and stuff like that, more anthem-y type stuff. And, we just really were excited about the idea of playing this for people live, so we crafted the record to be played as a live performance. So every song can be played live, whereas something like Real Fear, because we were a 5-piece, a lot of those songs will probably never see the light of day live again because, to get that many pieces of music together and instrumentation and stuff like that, it's just almost an impossibility at this point.
Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our theme song was written and composed by the legendary Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe on iTunes and give the show a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, click on the Patreon link at asthestorygrows.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.